Hi everyone. I want to do a little video lecture series for my general psychology students to add to what you're reading and what you're studying and to help you with the critical thinking exercises. I know that when you sometimes hear information about psychology, it makes a little bit more sense. So right now we are in the third week of the semester, and this week we're going to start working in on your brain. So just make sure that you go in and look at all the different parts of the brain, focus really on the neurological systems, and then all the different areas starting from the hindbrain all the way to the forebrain. And I will probably make another video to discuss a little bit about the brain in the next lecture series. So what we've done so far, we have talked a little bit about psychology and the field itself. And with some of your readings, you kind of got an overall history of psychology. So it gave you an idea about where our foundations come from as far as philosophies and the Greeks, and how we actually kind of formulated ourselves into an actual discipline. I tell students that psychology has a very long past, very short history as a specific discipline. So yes, we pulled from philosophy that kind of grounded us. We pulled from the natural sciences with scientific method, and when you kind of mix that together, it kind of helps us to kind of guide and direct where we're going to go in psychology. So that's kind of the historical perspective. Other issues as far as how we look at mental processes and how we look at human behavior, that's down to our definition of psychology. So when you think about the definition of psychology, it is a scientific study of human, and I'm going to add animal behavior and mental processes. And when you think about where we're falling under behavioral social sciences, that behavior part makes sense because we can see it, we can measure it. And researchers back in the day, when they were looking at developing this science, the social science of psychology, had a perspective of how are we structured and how do we function. And so therefore the schools of structuralism and functionalism came into play. And when you think about structuralism, and back in that time, they didn't have the technology that we have today to kind of see how that brain is actually structured and how that brain interacts in our environments. So they had to kind of figure out how that brain was structured by using a method called introspection. And they would basically just have an object, say for instance an apple, and they would walk up to that person and say, okay, tell me what you think about this apple, use your senses. And so they gather that information, and then they're going to go ask 50 other people, tell me about this apple. And if they gave some of the same responses, that it's green, or it tastes sour, or it's bitter, then they're using that introspection. They get an idea that how your brain is structured sees apples this way. If you want to understand the function, then throw people into an apple orchard and see how they function around apples. And that gives you an idea about how some of those mental processes work. So those were early schools of thoughts in psychology, but it really solidified the grounding of the discipline and a platform for other fields to come into. Some of the fields that are more popular, and I think I asked you this question in your critical thinking, we had behaviorism, which is a huge force in psychology, and it's still a force today. I'm trained as a behaviorist. We have psychoanalysis, which feeds off Freud, and we're going to talk about Freud more in some of our topics. We have humanistic, which is more about self-will, and so they have, from a humanistic viewpoint of needs and your wills to change. And so for the big schools that we look at today are psychoanalytic schools, behaviorist schools, humanistic schools, and many institutions and schools actually kind of have that type of thinking within their degree program. You also read about some of the subfields that we have in psychology, and there's many different subfields. It's not just psych. Many people go into clinical and counseling psychology. Some go into forensics. If you're into criminal minds, they may do forensics. School psychology, where they focus just with kids. Occupational areas, when you look at industrial psychology, and even health psychology. Health psychology is becoming a new field and discipline in my area. So it's not just one big area of psychology. There's also many different other subfields in that area. So make sure you take a look at those different areas. Also, too, the different perspectives on how we look at human behavior. So if you have this definition, of the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes, then what perspectives are you going to take to answer those questions? And some people may take a biological perspective. That's what you're reading about this week, is the brain. So from a biological perspective, how does our brain and our neurological system affect our behavior, affect our mental processes? I mentioned this last class, without a functioning brain, there's no mind. You have to have that functioning brain. The brain is it. So the more you understand the brain, it will help you also to understand the different topics we're going to get into, like memory, sleeping, consciousness, personality, psychological disorders. That brain sets the foundation. So that's why that chapter is so important. A different perspective may be behavioral. I was trained as a behaviorist, and so we look at every single environment that you could be in that might affect your behavior, and also to how that person thinks, those mental processes. And so I may go into different social context and do, naturalistic observation, case studies, surveys, to try to get a better understanding from a behavioral standpoint how those environments have conditioned and affected how you are today. Some people take a cognitive perspective. They're looking at how people think and how people are rationalize the situations that they're in. Some people take a subjective. Even though that you and I share the same environment, we still live within our own reality. So it's not just one big field of psychology. There's many subfields, but it's the perspectives that you take that we use to answer those questions. So if somebody asked me a question, I could take 5 different perspectives on how I respond just to that one question. That falls into the different research methods that we have. It's difficult, when you're dealing with humans, to kind of get the populations that you need. But we do have different methods of research that we use in the fields of psychology. Now, mainly they fall under 3 umbrellas: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. And quantitative research, which you're going to be reading, you're going to see statistics. You're going to see quantifiable data. You're going to see probabilities. You may read that this study showed 93% did this, or 23% did that. So you're going to see that quantifiable research. Some is qualitative. We have several theorists that follow qualitative theories, like Piaget, Freud. And so that's thick, rich description. They're going in, they're talking to people, they're observing, and through that observation and those narratives, they're pulling those codes and those themes and those categories into quality. What is the quality of this particular research that we can give and apply in other situations? Mixed method is one that we use. I don't think it's in your chapter, but it's basically just a little bit of quantitative, a little bit of qualitative, and you're kind of putting it together, which makes it more sound if the more that you can apply these methods. So in the next chapter, you're going to see the different types of methods that we use. So just be familiar with experimental, and you're going to see that in your chapters. You're going to see X causes Y. Always think of experimental being causation. And we're trying to isolate it down to certain variables causing something else to happen. And that can be tough to do. Correlational research, we can't always kind of isolate and see what causes, but there's relationships. An example I used today in class, does heat, is there a relationship between heat and people's aggression? Because we know that when temperature goes up, people tend to get a little bit more aggressive or more angry. Now, I can't say that 93 degrees causes people to be more aggressive than 94, but there's a correlation between when the temperature goes up, people's behavior increases to aggression. And so you can kind of see a little bit of the difference. We use, again, survey methods, we use case studies, we use descriptive statistics. You guys remember the mean, the mode, and the median? We use all of that they use in science. We use to try to understand how people behave and their mental processes. So if you can just have a good foundation with the definition, know a little bit of the subfields, what you need to work on this week is understanding how that brain works. That brain is everything, and I'll be bringing it up in almost every single topic that we discuss. So just reread those, have some focus to your reading, and then definitely start with the brain. And I have already uploaded the second critical thinking exercise, which deals with your brain, and I think that you'll enjoy it. I think that's the chapter you will enjoy. So hope this was quick and it gave you some perspective of your reading, so now you can kind of go back and maybe focus a little bit more on it, and then I'll have another video for you next week. All right, bye.